Cradle, The Rise of the Chosen, Chapter 1. The way the sun shined off the white stone walls of La Cubra de Fusilas was inspiration enough to get Takuma to continue his lonely trek up the mountain Giriana and fetch the medicinal water for his uncle at the sacred lake. For some reason, the lake never seemed so special, and the water didn't taste special or necessarily do anything out of the ordinary any of the 2 times he tried it. He also felt quite reproached that his parents asked him to take this trip, him only being 6, and knowing of the news of a killer leopard in the forest that led to and climbed up Giriana. However, for some reason, his family always treated him with a level of confidence and trust. He also swore one evening, in a winter a year ago, he overheard them say something odd happened that day. Takuma came to them, whatever that meant. Notwithstanding his parents' odd omission of concern, La Cruba was lit up in the sun, and he saw the famous Red-Foot monks having a procession near the south cliff or overhang. Being a commoner, although he had a mark of royalty, he wasn't allowed to know the meaning of La Cruba's existence, nor never look at or talk directly to any of the clergy. His mark of royalty was the blue pebble of Ituriyama. It was a prominent speck in the center of the bottom half of his left iris. His mother told him he may be blessed one day, when he was a man, to hold office in the halls of Vubratuk. He really didn't care much about that, being a young boy, but he thought about being important here and there. When he did, he felt a warning in a diod, meaning his heart. All of this talk and whispering about royalty and specialness seemed to make an impression on Swinley. Swinley was Takuma's older brother by 10 years. Swinley thought his younger brother was soft and slow and always tried to toughen him up. He'd steal the fat from his beef occasionally, or he'd snip off his zim, a braided lock of hair at the base of the skull. A zim represented an offering for wisdom, and most kids around Takuma's age rarely thought that desirable or necessary. All said, he thought Swinley secretly hated him, so he had been watching his older brother to prove his theory wrong or right. He still couldn't really tell. He was indeed in the forest on the lower side of Giriana, and he'd had a little bit of the heebie-jeebies thinking about the killer leopard. He was feeling a little hungry, so he sat at the base of an old-looking telma tree with his betraying green bark and pulled out the meal he packed. His mother made him include some salted pork instead of extra bunch of grapes because she said he needed more spirit power. She said she could feel his power declining because he was eating too much ayuman, earth food. He only ate the bananas too, anyway, and he sat thinking about nothing much for a few minutes before going up the trail towards the summit. He'd been walking, mesmerized, for several minutes because the canopy of the forest was lit and green, and nice and cool. He knew right away it was an atunda, a breach in the realm that brought peace to those in the forest at the time. So he missed the darkening beyond the forest. The clouds gathered into an almost blackness, and drops of rain started to patter on the forest canopy, and that got his attention. It was going to be a storm, no doubt, and he was only in his hern loincloth, so he needed to shelter so he wouldn't fall ill. He considered that maybe he was eating too much ayuman alone. The canopy flashed in bright white, and there was an outrageously loud clap of thunder that drove away the atunda completely. However, he was not scared, but saddened by the removal of the experience in his heart. He could not even feel it remotely in just that one instant. Luckily, there was a deer tree with a large opening at the base, a place he could shelter out of the growing downpour. He had only to duck slightly to get into the trunk of the huge deer tree, but immediately knew his life was in danger. In a fateful flash of lightning, he saw the beast. It was menacingly muscular, golden. It was a leopard. The leopard blinked slowly, probably a bit surprised itself, and then bared its fangs at Takuma. Takuma slowly backed out of the dirt, back into the rain, and the leopard stalked him. not looking like he just let the boy leave. Takuma was getting drenched in the rain, and he felt that he'd be shivering in no time. He wanted to cry, but it didn't feel natural. Something was keeping him in the moment and away from the boyish responses. In the dark green atmosphere of the forest, Takuma felt like Atunda came back. He knew little, but he knew that some of the more talkative shamans said that some Atunda can make friends with the Pojira, his tribe. It was namely that inspired the boy at that moment, friendship. So he stood there, making sure not to look the leopard in the eyes and let himself get drenched and be as vulnerable as he could be. Each step the approaching beast made, Takuma could feel the Atunda deepening, and he knew that he would follow this friendship to the death if he had to. The beast began to growl, as it was now, only one stride away from the boy. With his bowed head, the boy could see the white, wet paw, and he was compelled to say, "Friend?" The leopard stopped, growled, and snorted, and then walked away. "Friend," Takuma repeated. He had made it back to the deer and waited out the rain all while the Atunda mellowed out, and he was left refreshed and only had to wait 10 more minutes for the rain to stop. The air was fragrant with the pink flowers that grew high in the rito trees. He thought he remembered the flowers being colloquially called Wiutes and always thought it was a funny name. He got back on the path that led to the summit, and the track was relatively easy for how abrupt the elevation was. He knew that older people would be dying for breath on the particular incline he was on at the moment, and knew it probably had something to do with him being a hyper child, as the shaman Zichulu called him lovingly. As far as the trail went, it was the easy part, but he knew that once he made it to the sacred lake, he'd have to watch for bullies. They liked to take what they wanted from the kids whose parents sent them for water in exchange for being able to keep the water they stole from Kluptikut, the lake. And just like clockwork, another thunderstorm passed Guyana as he was about 3 miles away from Kluptikut. This time he just had to stow away under a group of large banana leaves while he snacked on Jintu seeds. He loved Ayuman. So once the rain stopped, he left the banana leaves and saw a beautiful relaxing fog was hanging around the forest at ankle level. And yes, it was nice to look at, but he couldn't spot rocks that could twist his ankles and sea snakes and tarantulas, so he could give them some room. Needless to say, the last 3 miles to Kliptikut were going to be slow. The low fog had subsided about 20 minutes ago, and Takuma was cresting the final small rocky hill that led to the lake. He stopped at the zenith and peeked about for bullies, and saw that no one else was there except for a drinking Edie deer. Edies were very thin-limbed, but had sharp horns and thick skulls. They were exceptionally fast and averse to aggression, though their behavior around Kliptikut was historically unpredictable at best. But not to worry, the beast was on the opposite shore. Takuma made his way to the pebbly beach and brought out the medicinal canteen and hastily filled it with clear, cold water. Unlike before, the boy could smell something different about this water. This time it had a hint of what he could only associate with the snows at the top of Mount Sluryu, far to the south of the tribe's territory. It was the mountain that belonged to the Mlagurthim. Just then, he saw the most majestic animal ever. He never even heard of this particular one's existence. It was a shiny, silver-coated Edie. It was just 5 feet away, standing stock still and regally. It was staring peacefully at Takuma, and the boy couldn't help but to grin widely while staying still to take it all in. Suddenly, a gust from the north bend of Kluptikut smacked both the beast and the boy, and the strangest moment, or nearly so, of the day was that Takuma clearly saw the silver strand, like a needle, fly from the nape of the Edie and fly straight into his right eye. The pain was sharp and severe, and hunched the boy over, but lasted only for a minute. By the time he could dry his watering eye, the Edie was gone, and the sun seemed to be low in the western sky. He needed to get back home before dark. He knew he was lucky that he didn't have to deal with any bullies as he descended the hill back to the main trail, down the steep side of Guyana, but his chest was feeling engaged. It was the best sense he got from the nervous energy. Several yards on the trail, he heard something rustling in the bushes, and he knew, so he just stopped hiking and stood there with his pack and canteen full of lake water. The rustling stopped for a moment, and even the air was still. Then 5 teens emerged from the green foliage. The leader, over 6'2", brandished a nasty-looking club and had an evil grin to go with it. Takuma just stood there, feeling his blood go slightly cold. "You got your water. Now what am I getting, little girl?" the one with the club said. Takuma saw that he had a thick scar that parted his hair on the left side of his head. Takuma didn't want to say anything at all because he was known to have a smart mouth at times, but if he stayed quiet, he knew it'd just egg on this guy. "I'm 6 years old. I need to get home, sir." That got the whole gang in an uproar of laughter. Once they stopped, the leader spat on the ground and rubbed his nose a couple times. "I asked, what you got, son?" Takuma knew he could part with the salted pork and the single banana he had left, and they might let him take the water, but he knew it wouldn't be that simple. They could do other things. So he stood there and looked at his feet. He heard them sniggering and then sensed the leader walking up to him. He wasn't scared, but he had literally no idea what to do. The big bully put a finger under the boy's chin and lifted his head, and Takuma looked into the villain's eyes. "Don't be tough, okay? Just do what I say." Something took over Takuma, and he shoved the bully's hand away and took a fighting stance. The teens roared in laughter and anticipation. Before he even saw it coming, the large teen swung the club into the boy's left thigh, and he fell over on the ground, just from the physics of the attack, but he kept his eyes on the bullies. The large teen stood over him and was going to stomp somewhere on his body, but somehow Takuma got up quickly while the behemoth reset. "Hope you have a hard noggin." The bully brought the club up high in the air, and then everything went white. It was quite astounding that Takuma made it home just at sunset. He knew he was missing something that was key, but for the life of him, he couldn't bring up what was so odd upon his arrival at the village. Their little hut, his family's, had glowing candlelight pouring from the window. He had a feeling Uncle Yokota was going to get over this illness because of the lake water. Takuma believed now. "Tai, Kum, is that you?" His mother called from the kitchen, which was just a potbelly wood stove in the corner and a table with 3 chairs and a half a full basin of water. "Yeah, Ma, I got it. It was a long trip. Hinto de Malgo." Hinto de Malgo was a saying that meant, basically, you went through hardships, but it's all okay now. "Hinto de Malgo," she echoed. She wore her fiery orange scarf tonight, and her dark brown hair glistened in the candlelight. Takuma set the canteen on the table and stood there trying to remember what happened, but didn't know where to start. "Gigja, Yumul. Hurry up and eat, Kum." She dropped her fork, and her hands were shaking as she stared into her son's eye. Then, lightning fast, she put both her hands on both her son's cheeks and stared into his eyes. Tears started flowing from hers. "What the heck, Mom?" Takuma exclaimed. "Rifi," she yelled. Rifi was his father. Kum has the full Itarayama." He avoided it until well in the early morning, but finally he left his pallet and went in his cupboard and pulled out his mirror shard. And sure enough, he now had the blue pebble in each iris, the full Itarayama.